Can you guys see that? Okay, cool, let's go. So hi, I'm Georgia Hampton, and my thesis work is a long-form critical piece with the working title, Not Like the Other Guys, Sexy Psychopaths and How Women Watch Gendered Violence. My thesis begins by focusing on the serial killer Ted Bundy's 1979 murder trial, which was the first nationally televised criminal trial in the United States. Bundy was hardly the first killer to pique spectator intrigue, but I see him as a meaningful touchstone in a particular kind of killer who's interesting in a particular way. Here was a charming, handsome white guy who had evidently made it a practice to kill white women and girls, bludgeoning them to death, raping them, and mutilating their bodies. But his trial was notably populated in large part by young white women who, much to the shock and confusion of media outlets covering the trial, were endlessly fascinated by the killer. I see this event as an important first example of how a charming murderer makes for an addictive entertainment. Quoting from my thesis, I write, "Ted Bundy wasn't the first or the only person to pair charming, handsome man with homicidal maniac, but his trial was an important step toward a trend that would become exceedingly common well beyond the courtroom. Bundy premeditated the emergence of a new character in modern entertainment, and one that generates around itself a familiar fascination, particularly with women. I've begun referring to this trope as the sexy path, a psychopathic male lead who is also devastatingly attractive. The sexy path exists within the confines of visual entertainment because, naturally, he's meant to be seen. How else are we as consumers supposed to take in his strong jawline, his smoldering gaze, his toned forearms? Ted Bundy is an example of the real-life, true crime version of this trope, but I've also traced this character to its point of origin within the world of capital E entertainment. I found that one character in particular serves as the foundation upon which the sexy path trope really flourishes. The character JD, played by Christian Slater in the 1988 black comedy Heathers. The film's release preceded the modern conversation about school violence and male rage by at least a decade, but JD presented a flavor of murderous psychopath that was very new for 1988. He was untrustworthy from the start, the kind of resentful teenage boy who would set off an avalanche of red flags to any modern observer. But he was charming in a way that is also unique to teenage boys. JD carried an unwavering confidence in his twisted views on society that, coupled with his 80s heartthrob middle part and single arched eyebrow, made his psychopathy devilish in a way that felt fun until it suddenly wasn't. Quoting again from my thesis, JD was a psychopath dressed as a classic bad boy, blurring the line between murderous chaos and a bit of high school hijinks. Heathers combined the familiar trappings of a teen romance with murder and manipulation, and JD intentionally played with safety and danger, repeatedly tricking the female lead Veronica, played by Winona Ryder, with murder disguised as a flirtatious game. As I formed an etymology of the sexy path, I found that it's extremely common for an actor playing a sexy path to have previous roles in which he played a romantic leading man, specifically in a program largely aimed at young women. The men playing the sexy path are what I refer to as predetermined heartthrobs because of the pre-existing association we have with them as crush-worthy protagonists. If anything, the inherent attractiveness of these men adds to the shock value of their violent behavior in these unexpected roles. This, I argue, continues to blur the lines between safety and danger to the point where, I write, it's difficult to say with complete certainty whether his attractiveness is despite his murderous nature or because of it. Two contemporary examples, the ongoing Netflix series You and the Netflix film Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, both released in 2019, follow this formula to a T. In You, actor Penn Badgley, formerly of Gossip Girl fame, plays Joe, a stalker turned murderer with a withering jawline who ends up killing his girlfriend and almost everyone else in her life. And in Extremely Wicked, Disney darling and total hunk Zac Efron plays who else but Ted Bundy, in a biopic that teeters a little too close to sympathy for my taste. In both cases, the sexy path is front and center. He's the protagonist, the perspective we are privileged to above all others. Notably, in You, the viewer is treated to Joe's endless inner monologue, saying things like, "She gave me no choice," after bashing a woman's head in with a rock. Listening to Joe's endless musings, the red flags practically wave themselves. But the showrunners for both You and Extremely Wicked are quick to defend their respective programs, stating that these stories serve to remind women of the shocking fact that men can be dangerous, even if they're attractive. This interestingly mirrors most of the articles that attempt to answer the question of why so many women are interested in these kinds of stories. The general consensus is that apparently, women are interested in stories about men murdering women because it can offer some kind of morbid crash course in what not to do, a fantasy of control over a situation women are told to fear their whole lives. Kate Tuttle explains it well in her aptly titled 2019 piece, Why Do Women Love True Crime in the New York Times. Quote, "My fascination springs from the same sources that have always drawn people to the genre: straightforward curiosity, vicarious thrills, and a kind of magical thinking that maybe if you consume crime as art, you'll never confront it in real life. But that doesn't line up with the way viewers, especially women, are talking about these shows. If Twitter is any indication of the message conveyed through a piece of entertainment, it appears as though the message evidently sent through You and Extremely Wicked wasn't just misunderstood, but rejected completely. Here, the sexy path isn't supposed to be taken so seriously. Sure, he killed all those people, but he's hot and none of this is real, so why worry? Across the board, the message being sent is that we shouldn't worry about this kind of show. Either we shouldn't worry because the sexy path is supposed to teach women how to survive, or we shouldn't worry because we aren't supposed to take this character so seriously. But what I believe is truly happening here is a waving away of real analysis of the sexy path, either by treating him as a cautionary tale or as fodder for a harmless crush. In one corner, you have the producers of Sexy Path Entertainment trying to say that merely presenting an audience with a psychopathic hottie could somehow produce a larger critique of the privileges that psychopathic hotties have in modern society. This is backed up by a tsunami of think pieces declaring that these shows are empowering for women because they're educational. In another corner, there's a vocal group of women online who treat these shows as a voyeuristic playground where you are invited to sympathize with or even be attracted to a male killer as you watch him choke a woman to death on screen. In both cases, the standard sexy path story is forgiven, excused, and justified. Something isn't right here. So much of Kate Tuttle's magical thinking hinges on victim blaming, the idea that female viewers learn valuable lessons from the less fortunate women who somehow did something wrong to merit their on-screen death at the hands of a hunky killer. Here, white heterosexual women are the most vulnerable to male violence, which, though statistically untrue, is as old a message as any. But none of this is particularly challenged, at least not by the people making these programs or writing pieces musing about the female fascination with them. The blame is overwhelmingly placed on the female viewers oogling these dishy killers for, apparently, not getting the real message. It's treated as an anomaly, an exception to the more palatable idea that the sexy path is in fact a sexy warning that women everywhere can learn from. Some programs have attempted to double down on this supposedly educational message by casting a woman as the protagonist, meant to serve as the ultimate foil to and bringer of justice against the male antagonist. I've looked at this through the example of The Fall, an intimately violent Northern Ireland-based crime drama starring Gillian Anderson as a British detective sent to take down an elusive and, of course, attractive serial killer named Paul Spector, played by Jamie Dorner, who would later be cast as Christian Grey in the 50 Shades trilogy. Anderson's character, Stella Gibson, is portrayed as the sole female avenger in the face of a woman-hating psychopath. She's sexually promiscuous, fiercely independent, and undeniably glamorous. But ultimately, the show ties her to Spector in a way that feels disappointingly familiar. The show's season 2 finale has Gibson save Spector's life, cradling him in her arms as she cries out, "We're losing him." I write, evoked at the same time are the equally bizarre images of Gibson as mother figure to Spector or his passionate lover. Both options flatten her into a tired archetype of female caregiving. And if that's the case, what was the point of the lingering violence that viewers had to slog through to get to this point? What message was really there, if any at all? The real problem here is that the Sexy Path program encourages viewers to view violence against women through the lens of the male perpetrator, treating his story as more interesting than that of anyone else. So long as the sexy path is the main character, any woman on screen is only as important as her relationship to that male lead. And any potential critique that a sexy path show makes about male violence against women is forever obscured by its own structure, one that flirts with the idea that this violence could be a sexy game. In the world according to the sexy path, male violence against women isn't a larger societal problem, but a case-by-case phenomenon, and a problem that women are meant to fix. But watching sexy path entertainment can, in a deceptive way, scratch a familiar itch, the fantasy of control over gendered violence by turning it into something voyeuristic. If this violence can be repackaged as indulgent, scandalous, even romantic, then it's easy to consume it as a fantasy, where the reality of this violence can be locked away and deemed impossible. But all that really ends up doing is create an insular bubble in which a toxic perception of gendered violence, the idea that it is an individual woman's responsibility to learn how to avoid a violent death at the hands of a man, can continue unchecked. I conclude in my thesis that 3 things need to happen to make an entertaining show in which gendered violence is at its center. 1, the sexy path and the quasi-romantic relationship he has to his female counterparts must be scrapped completely. 2, women must be placed solidly at the front of these stories. They must be the perspective that matters most. And 3, the violence being dealt with on screen must be treated as intrinsically connected to the community that allows for it to occur. The 2018 TV adaptation of Gillian Flynn's mystery novel Sharp Objects is, to me, the best example of this shift. The single-season series follows Camille Preaker, played by Amy Adams, a St. Louis-based reporter sent on assignment to her hometown of Wind Gap, Missouri, to cover the murder of a local teen girl. Female relationships, particularly familial relationships, are at its center, but so too is a legacy of abuse endured by women at the hands of man. Without depicting this fact in a titillating way, the show reveals early on that Camille was, as a teen, gang raped by a group of boys in the woods. And not only this, but that her assault was merely one in a long tradition of this violence, gone ignored by the larger community, including the women. Men are presumed to carry some element of violence to them in Wind Gap, but the women, the show makes clear, are the enforcers of the patriarchal status quo. Sharp Objects isn't perfect, but it takes an important step away from the sexy path by trading him in for something I see as much more impactful, a cultural indictment of the community that allows this character to flourish. And this kind of show doesn't have to be some dutiful, hand-wringing slog through the horrors of gendered violence. There is a wealth of extremely compelling entertainment that has tackled issues of power, gender, and violence. Think of Top of the Lake, Broadchurch, even something as playful as Killing Eve. I'm sure there are many other movies and TV shows that I haven't mentioned that have come to your mind. They're out there, and I am certain that they are much, much better than any sexy path-driven form of entertainment. The sexy path does not and will not provide cultural critique about the very real threat of violence against women. It's just not how this trope works. The sexy path's entire foundation is based in misdirection, a bizarre dissonance in the midst of Me Too and the rightful vanquishing of previously beloved men. Another story about Ted Bundy isn't going to solve the mystery of gendered violence, and no plucky heroine will do it either, so long as she is cast alongside a hunky psycho played by an actor who formerly graced a 2-page spread on Tiger Beat magazine. Ultimately, the sexy path entertainment is nothing more than misogyny disguised by excellent bone structure and the kind of disingenuous writing that pretends that we're all in on the joke when more than 50% of us are, in fact, its punchline. But women aren't fools, and never has the current cultural moment been so poised to demand something better from this particular kind of entertainment, one that is explicitly concerned with women and violence. Why not demand it? Thank you.